So, this was the Bulgar Gymnasium the young Alexander Theodorov Balan started to visit, and it played a crucial role in his development. What about its school policy? It has been established with a foundational document called Chrysobul, where the cultural independence of the Bulgarian minority was supported, opened on the 1st of May 1859, and it gradually became one of the centers of the Bulgarian national cultural movement in the 19th century. It gathered important figures as teachers and students. Nevertheless, in the school policy, one can mention a kind of this pendulum of different political trends, starting with this initial imbalance between Romanian cultural policy and Bulgarian cultural policy. It started to be Romanized, Russified, Bulgarianized, and so on, which brought, of course, rivalries among the students. So, okay. Balan was strongly influenced by some of his teachers, especially by the teacher Vasil Stoyanov, who was at that time already a founding member of the Bulgarian Society of Letters, later the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. So he, all of a sudden, he started to feel Bulgarian. There was a birth of patriotic self-consciousness in the young Balan. And he started to develop interest in history of Bulgarian language, Slavic languages, history, and ethnography. During that time, in the age of 15, he was involved, of course, in personal rivalries with some other young patriots, Romanian patriots. What he didn't know that his school environment at that time already was full of future Bulgarian ministers, state officials, scholars, writers, public figures. He was already part of the Bulgarian elite without knowing it. After that, with the protection of Vasil Stoyanov, he went to Europe and studied Slavonic philologies in the best scholarly centers of Europe by the best linguists of his time. First in Prague by Professor Jan Gebauer, prominent Czech linguist, and another one, Professor Martin Hatala, also a very important figure. After that, introduced with recommendations by Gebauer and another important person, Konstantin Ilcek, he went to Leipzig and was student of Professor August Leskin, one of the most important German linguists. He was Slavist and Panslawist at the same time. Balan writes a dissertation there. At that time, he started participating in Bulgarian patriotic or student organization, which was in rivalries with other patriotic organizations, and not only rivalry, but also union with the other Slavs. Here, he was a Panslavist on a practical basis, so to say, but inside this Pan-Slavic circle, there was strong tensions. And in 1884, he returns to Sofia. And there, what he's expected, so to say, by a really quick academic and official career. All of a sudden, the young Balan was put to the post of head of the Department of Slavonic Ethnography, Dialectology, and History of Bulgarian Language in the high school, and 1 year after that he was elected to be the first rector of the first Bulgarian university in Sofia. He was elected for this post 2 more times then, and then he was dean of the Faculty of Philology, head of the Department of Bulgarian and Slavonic Literatures, and a lot of other positions. He established himself in his long life path as one of the leading Bulgarian linguists and also author of the first Bulgarian literary history. These were his scholarly field, a typical philologist. So, and I'm going to my conclusion because I'm already over my time. How can we interpret this life path? What happened to this young guy? And who was not so young, of course. So, let's analyze certain layers of his biographical trajectory. Kuwait, Belgrade, Prague, Leipzig, Sofia. A trajectory very different from the trajectory of the emigrants described by Anna. Then, he was a pupil student member of the Bulgarian Academy of Science, rector, professor, and at the same time important state official. What about the consequences of the ideologically burdened social roles in this biographical trajectory? He started with a child with no clear identity. Then he was transformed into a young Bulgarian patriot, then into a Slavist scholar. Then he found himself in the position of modernizer of the Bulgarian education in a Western manner, and he ended in his late years as cultural nationalist and linguistic purist. Actually, at that time, in his late years, there was a lot of jokes about the linguistic inventions of Balan in Bulgaria. At the same time, we should mention that his career and life path has been observed by important figures, father figures, who took care about the career of the young Alexander Theodorou Balan. These were his teacher, Mrs. but also the most important Slavist of his time. Jan Gebauer, Professor Konstantin Ireček, Professor Marin Zinov in Kharkov, Professor Ivan Shishmanov in Sofia, and so on. They took care about the fate of the young, talented Balan. So, I will skip this because I don't have really time for that. I will skip this because I don't have really time for that. To interpret dreams is not so easy. I interpret this as a kind of personal story of self-organization, and as a kind of evidence. I'll bring here a quotation from the memoir about myself Balan wrote in his late years. There he confesses that in his mature years he has practically forgotten the Balkan languages he commanded as a child. He forgot Greek, Turkish and Romanian. Instead, he acquired a professional command of almost all Slavic languages. In addition, he also commanded German and French. His wife was French. So in his long life, he moved from a non-prestigious Orient condition, multilingual and multicultural Balkan and Bessarabic child, to another highly prestigious, multilingual and multicultural condition, that of Slavic scholar of eternal prominence and of Bulgarian distinguished scholar and educational state official. This position can be regarded as kind of socially accepted compromise between Westernization and Panslavism, as a compromise loaded with academic authority and prestige. His career has been driven by powerful collective phantasma, but imagination here means already something quite different from the bold collective and personal dreams. It means established institutional patterns and clear role models. His biographical trajectory clearly demonstrates that the social imaginations were already transformed into stabilized realities and clear career routes, procedural role models and desirable institutional positions. Balan's career was almost predetermined by these patterns, and in addition, it involved his personal desires and identifications. So I'll end with these final questions, which are questions to the project of a counter-universal history. Is this personal of one of the repressed or not? Is it possible to universalize this personal biographical trajectory? How should we interpret the metaphor of self-organization in this particular case? I'm just trying to demonstrate the difficulties of this plurality, enormous plurality of various stories, which is really threatening, which is really giving place to certain fears, so to say.
Thanks a lot. I do do appreciate the polemical stance, and I feel tempted to engage in these polemics right away. However, I will not do it, and I will give the voice to the audience maybe later on. And I'm going to give voice to the audience directly. So if you have any questions, comments regarding this part especially, but maybe our entire meeting here, then go ahead. Yes? Okay, I'll come with the microphone. I'll pass it to you, thanks.
Hello, thank you for the presentations. I was just wondering if you have thought about different alternative forms of authorization and alternative subjectivities in the framework of social media, and where dominant discourse and hegemonic subjectivity perhaps isn't as hegemonic. And I think that increasingly, social media usage, particularly even in protests and social movements recently, have been great signifiers and great spaces for identity formation, especially alternative identity formation. So, just a thought.
Okay, so do you want to comment on the...
I think that if we speak about the space of the imaginative... Słucham? Czy ja mam włączony?
O, jak pan to się do niego zbliży, to słychać.
If we think about the space of imaginative realizations, medias are the privileged place of it. And we can always see two different levels. One is what is imagined, so the images, the persons, the stereotypes, the figures, the relations imagined. And the second important thing is how it is done. So the mechanisms, they are ruling this sphere of representation. And I think that the most important thing are these mechanisms which are ruling this sphere. These are mechanisms of universality, in matter of fact. I mean that if we look on the mechanisms of the sphere of public communication in Russia, Poland, and Bulgaria, I think, and in France and the United States, they are becoming more and more homogeneous. They are here is the universality. The images are quite different, but the mechanism that is producing them is homogeneous. Here we have the universal.
Wonder if Lev Tolstoy would accept that, because he was definitely sure about the difference between the unhappy families, and the level of abstract mechanism is so abstract that maybe you can unify everything. Actually, I wanted to ask you, what about contemporary European populism? What about Berlusconi? What about Le Pen? What about a lot of imaginative father figures which are spread not only in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe as well? What about the anonymous law there, about the institutional order? Why is the crisis of the institutional order visible in Western Europe? That means this nice difference between East and West, maybe it doesn't function anymore because of populism. But I wanted to address the question as well. My point was that there is not a single and clear binary dichotomy between hegemonic discourse and discourses in opposition or resistance. You see that in the case of Alexander Theodorov Dolan, the pan-Slavic discourse, the nationalistic discourse, and the institutional discourse of the University of Sofia has been so established that he used to live inside these discourses, and he used to be privileged inside these discourses without being, let's say, direct victim of the hegemonic westernized discourse. So, and his subjectivation was in a very specific situation. He was clever enough to extract certain benefits from it.
Okay, this is a very interesting question. Thank you for it. Because all my point was that there is no such a simple logic that we have more primitive imaginary order and then we have more developed symbolic order. This is the classical, let's say, Lacanian point of view, and I think it is very simplified. And historically, you can have different evolutions. And here I will make a term in Auerbach's. There is Erich Auerbach reading of Roman texts. You know that in Mimesis there is a text about late Roman image of the order, of Roman order. And Auerbach asks why in the late image of the order we have merely very crude, cruel, simple narration, Latin construction. All the complicated symbolic system of Latin, characteristic for the 1st or 2nd century, are lost. And he answers, I don't know why, but there is something which is very regressive. And in this way, I would say the fact that in some period of history, in some part of the world, you have very strong symbolic anonymous law, doesn't mean that you cannot have 10 years after a return of imaginative phantoms. Yes, the return of repressed in some way. But these two orders are quite different and both are repressive, what I want to say.
This could be easily formulated in much better terms, charismatic authority, bureaucratic.
Okay. Joanna?
As I understood that at the beginning of your presentation you said that you were critical of this project to write the counter-universal history from the standpoint of peripheries, let's say. At the same time, when you presented your case study, one could think that there are probably that this particular history has the moments when it could overlap with the fate of with the trajectories of a lot of, let's say, intellectuals in the 19th centuries in Poland who were educated also abroad, or there was no abroad, but in the so-called centers, either in St. Petersburg or in Paris or whatever. Or that could be also a similar story you could imagine could happen right now in the...
I wanted to sort of add my remarks to this question because I had similar observations. For instance, we could think nowadays about the Mexican intellectual that is educated in the US, in the Mexican diaspora, then comes back to Mexico. And what would be, I think, universal in this situation is that coming from the periphery, to take a proper place in the elites of your periphery country, you need to go at a certain moment to the center and have some symbolic credit from there, and then you come back and your position is somehow acknowledged by the center. And so I don't know how important was this Leipzig episode in the education of your case study here. However, I paid attention to precisely this fact, just as Jan said.
Okay, to answer two questions, one after the other, because they are connected, but at the same time they are different. Of course, there are similarities with a lot of, let's say, Kulturträgers from different parts of the world who go to the center, acquire certain knowledge and certain models, certain authority, and then return back to their own countries and plays the role of authority there. But I do believe that these similarities on this level of abstractions are poor of content. What is really interesting is in the concrete perplexities of these life paths, and I try to demonstrate them, not to reduce them to certain abstract trajectory, although there is no time to go into details. Biographical details are very instructive sometimes. And because of that, I think in Wittgensteinian terms, so to say. I'm thinking in the category of plurality of life paths, plurality of personal group and national stories and transnational stories, which are bound, of course, with certain similarities, but their similarities not, and these similarities do not lead to any universal common denominator. These are, as Wittgenstein used to say, family similarities. And this is a kind of knot of various stories and narratives. Some of them are similar to others, others are similar to third parties, and so on, but there is no, let's say, an abstract level of universalization. And every abstract universalization will deprive the stories of their real, let's say, real content, of their real energy.
Yes, so I can see your point, but I think the problem that we have is, first of all, I would not confuse abstract with the universal. I think these are two different things. And if you call this life stories abstract, I don't think it's abstract. I think it's a very, very concrete thing that you have to leave your country to get fully acknowledged and fully educated, and then you have to come back as an element that was, you know, present here. But just yes, however, my main point in favor of universalism or some sort of universality would be that we live in a world where we do have a universal force operating, and this is capitalism. So, and whatever we say, if we like it or not, it is a universal force. It is a force that actually configures lives and problems and existences of various people around the world in a very, very similar way. So, my point would be, and that was a sort of idea behind this this counter universality. But my idea would be, if we want to somehow oppose but also understand this force, then we have to construct some sort of universality that would correspond to this universality of the capital.
I would like to also to continue this discussion, because I think the decision, do we use some level of universal description, is not a purely cognitive decision, but it has a very practical, in the ethical sense, consequences. And here I agree with what Janek said, that if you have some universal law, which is called capitalism, which works behind such paternal figures like Berlusconi and others, I think it is an ethical and political need to find a language we can also communicate on the same level of universality. And I don't believe that you can really make a totally individual story. You make it in psychoanalysis, when you make a totally individual story, and even in psychoanalysis it doesn't work. Especially if you use language, then you have some degree of universality. So it is the question to find a good level of linguistic universality to have an ethical or political effect.
The questions are difficult, so I should answer immediately in order not to forget them. I will start from the back. Imagine a psychoanalytic practice, a therapy, and a woman goes to a psychoanalyst that has certain complaints, and his only explanation, interpretation, and therapy is this all is because of the male dominance, and that's it. So should the patient be really content with that explanation, interpretation, and cure? I don't believe so. If we explain everything with capitalism, it is the same. Capitalism is in fact an economic system. And if we reduce all the problems to its economic universality, which do exist, indeed, I agree with that. If we reduce everything to its economic reality of, let's say, economic exploitation, then this will resemble this psychoanalytic practice. So my whole point is that we should not use capitalism as only interpretative care, because this will be a kind of a regress to old Marxism and to the old Marxist division between economy and superstructure, which I don't accept. Pardon?
It's Stalinism, not Marxism.
It's Marxism. Okay, this is another story. Between these two things is not only useless, it's harmful. And my point is to introduce here certain narratives, symbolic worlds, symbolic orders, the competition between these symbolic orders, and the part of the individual and of, let's say, certain groups in between. And this is another story. This is much more sophisticated interpretation. If we reduce everything to such type of universality, then we are going to lose all the complexity of the story. The story is plural.
I would completely agree if I believe that capitalism can be reduced to its purely economical dimension. It cannot. It's a social formation with certain rules of subjectivity,
culturally in different places.
Nowadays, you know, there's a funny story about TV being introduced to Bhutan that never had TV, and then after a year they made a social survey, and then suddenly 50% of girls wanted to be blonde because they saw it on the TV. So it's just a small example. It's not only about economics. It's not how economy functions. Capitalism is a certain social formation, and it includes cultural values. For instance, capitalism was a carrier of certain values regarding even how you treat your own body. So it's really a multi-dimensional process or whatever entity that includes, when you know, for instance, this ethos of entrepreneur, that you always have to be entrepreneurial. right? This is part of capitalism. It has got nothing to do with economy. This is a subjectivity. This is a construction of subjectivity. So this, I would completely agree if we could somehow reduce capitalism to economy only. But it never functions as economy. It somehow penetrates the entire social and cultural structure, and it changes it.
Yeah, and it started producing differences, not equalities, not similarities.
Also differences, but not only differences. That's I would not say that there are no differences. I would just not say that there are only differences and nothing that we have in common. I think this is a point. This is a good point because we reach a certain moment when we see how our perspectives diverge, right?
Judith Butler says in an essay that universality in contemporary context is a contested term which broadens its limits with each interpretation.
Do we have more comments, questions? We have a question asked by Agata Jaszkiewicz, who had to leave, and she said, I would like to ask funny question. Quote unquote, quotation marks. Is the fact that we talk English here about Panslawism, is it a proof of or a kind of self-colonization? I have to answer. This is a good question, but actually we were really discussing and thinking about what language should be used, because we are here not only among Slavs, but even among Slavs, what language would we use? Polish? That's arrogant, especially for us being organizers in Poland, to propose Polish as the universal, in this case, universal common language. Russian? I don't know, this is equally contested. Maybe this old style cegierno-słowiański, old, I don't even know the name in English of this language, this old language of Slavs from the churches or whatever.
По времето на Александър Теодоров Балан на Конгрес по славистика са се говорили всички славянски езици едновременно и никой не е искал превод. I'll translate this in maybe Russian, no, in English. In the lifetime of Alexander Teodorov Balan, in all the conferences and congresses of Slavists, there were spoken all the Slavic languages and nobody needed translation. But the political and cultural frames changed, and now we are talking English. Let's say 20 years ago, here was at that place where it was spoken only Russian.
I ask you one question more. We will not continue the theoretical discussion, but in Bulgarian and Balkanian imaginary, does Poland exist?
Oh yeah.
And if it exists, what is the image of Poland?
The traditional image of the Polish nation in the Bulgarian mythology, which is a mythology of the revival period, is very positive. Because certain Polish revolutionaries went to Bulgarian land. At that time there was no state. Bulgaria was part of the Ottoman Empire. And they started educate the people, they started to propagate revolutionary ideas. This, let's say, Tchaikovsky or the other ones, there are two very important figures. The second one I forgot in the moment. But they were so important that certain Bulgarian revolutionary changed their name in Polish manner to imitate the Polish models. For example, Rakowski, Bankowski, and so on.
Okay.
This was local.
Do we have more questions or any other comments you would like to make or anything?
Of course.
Because we're almost approaching our time. Kasia?
A bit off topic, but maybe a bit off topic, but you have just asked about Poland, and I will ask you about the problem of Balkan Federation in Bulgaria, because you were talking about local nationalism and Panslawism, but as we know, the tradition of Balkan Federation in the developed in communist parties, and which was, how to say, which was so crucial for Czechoslovakia, is still vital today. And how the tradition of Balkan Federation looks like in Bulgaria.
This is a question for another paper. A very long question. First, imaginary projects about the Balkan Federation started, let's say, in the early years of the 19th century, when the so-called Illyrian movement was developing in Croatia and Slovenia, and they were purely mythological, so to say. They were deprived of any real practical base and the possibility to be introduced into practice. After that, in the 50s of the 19th century, there was another series of Balkan Federation projects. After that, before the Balkan War, the First Balkan War, and after that, during the, let's say, Second Comintern time, and after that, in the age of Stalinism, where Georg Dimitrov and Tito started to...
In Bulgaria.
I believe that for the time being, the possibility for such a federation right now is absolutely excluded. That means so many historical hatred, hostility, and trauma are gathered that so many different institutional history of each national state that it's really utopian to think that this will disappear all of a sudden, because there would be better to have a federation. You saw what happened to Yugoslavia, which had a really important tradition behind its back, and it disintegrated because of various reasons in such a bloody manner. So let's not be let's be dreamer to a certain extent, not to the extreme.
The problem is that in Yugoslavia, this idea is very vital now. And I understand that the situation is different in Bulgaria. Okay?
I don't understand. What do you mean by vital?
The idea of Balkan Federation, yes, and generally Yugoslav Federation is very vital in ex-Yugoslavia now.
Among immigrants? Where?
No, among people.
Among certain intellectual circles, certain Yugo-nostalgics maybe?
And among others, really, trust me.
We have one question.
And Yugoslavia is not the Balkans.
Właśnie nie wiem, czy pytanie, czy takie przemyślenie, to może nie jest zbyt eleganckim zabiegiem z mojej strony, ale pomyślałem, że skoro konferencja ma w tytule termin panslawizm, to ciekawym zagadnieniem jest w ogóle też nieobecność panslawizmu jako takiego w kulturze polskiej. Bo w wykładzie pana Kiosewa była mowa o panslawizmie rosyjskim i czeskim. Natomiast jak wiadomo, panslawizm nigdy nie przyjął się w kulturze polskiej. I teraz wracając do wykładu pana Bowła, można by się zastanowić, czy czasem nie było tak, że ten panslawizm po prostu nie miał miejsca w polskiej kulturze, bo miejsca mieć nie mógł, dlatego że był w kontrze do tej sytuacji kulturalnej czy kulturowej, która wytworzyła się właśnie na terenach Rzeczpospolitej obojga narodów, czyli tak naprawdę zagrażał jakby ten panslawizm sytuacji w państwie, znaczy w Rzeczpospolitej obojga narodów. Czyli raczej tutaj był jakby panpolonizm w opozycji do panslawizmu. Nie wiem, to jest takie jakby przemyślenie i może też jakieś pytanie.
Wydaje mi się, że ma Pan rację naturalnie, że polski panslawizm istnieje jak najbardziej i tutaj był trochę nieobecny. I to znowu temat na całą konferencję i na kilku konferencji na pewno, na kilka konferencji. I jest na ten temat literatura ogromna, że przypomnę tutaj o twórczości Leszka Kuka, który jest obecnie dyrektorem w Rzymie. Napisał kilka książek na temat panslawizmu polskiego, u Mickiewicza, u Choćki, Aleksander Choćko i tak dalej. Jest cała szkoła panslawistyczna, która się rozwinęła przeważnie w Paryżu, ale poza tym mamy Trentowskiego w Poznaniu i cały szereg ludzi, którzy starali się propagować wizję panslawizmu pod kierownictwem Polski. To jest rzeczywiście bardzo, bardzo ważne i na pewno tutejszym slawistom arce znane, więc nie będę tego rozwijać za długo, ale naturalnie racja. Wydaje mi się, że trzeba było to potem przypomnieć.
I think we can conclude.
Maybe you remember I spoke about two variants of Panslavism, the Russian variant and the Czech variant. I'm not specialist in Polish history, but from my point of view, in Poland, Panslavism was always perceived as mask of Russian imperialism. And because of that, it was a threat, not a possibility. This was not the case with the small Slavic nations, which used the ideology of Panslavism to support their own nationalism and to regard themselves as part of the great Slavic sea. And this was the case with the Czech, with the Slovaks, with the Croats, with the Bulgarians and so on. And the Polish people is a huge people, a great nation, so not small enough to need Panslavism.
No tak, tylko właśnie tutaj problem polegał na tym, że z jednej strony mamy Polaków, a z drugiej strony mamy Słowian, także Słowian, bo jeżeli teraz wykluczymy na chwilę Litwinów z tego dyskursu, to mamy Białorusinów i mamy Ukraińców. I teraz idea panslawizmu mogłaby wesprzeć pozycję Ukraińców i Białorusinów w kontrze do Polaków. Stąd jest problem jakby właśnie tej wizji panslawizmu ze strony Polaków. I w tym momencie też jest ciekawa oczywiście kwestia w ogóle tego samookreślenia i tego wątku w biografii, o której Pan wspominał, prawda, bo trochę też w dyskusji o tym zapomnieliśmy.
I don't know about his early years in Leipzig, in Prague, but at the end of his life he was definitely a Bulgarian nationalist. And purist.
Proszę Państwa, czas nam się kończył, we're running out of time. One more thing that maybe we could invite you to, to już po polsku, bo dotyczy tylko Polaków, bo będzie po polsku wydarzenie. To jest wykład Jakuba Majmurka, który podsumuje ten program filmowy i to będzie w niedzielę o godzinie, o której? O 12. Tak? Bo ja nie wiem, tego nie widziałem w programie dokładnie, więc tak patrzę.
Tak. Program filmowy jest w piątek i soboty, w niedzielę o 12 jest podsumowanie.
Tak, czyli w niedzielę o 12 zapraszamy na wykład Jakuba Majmurka, który to podsumuje. No i cóż, dziękuję bardzo naszym gościom. Thank you very much for coming and taking part in this session. Państwu również dziękuję za uwagę. Do widzenia.